Good evening, everyone. So, if you're seeing this real time, the reason we're not having our normal live stream is because we're having Vacation Bible School. Right around this time, we should be having a real good time. It's when the music's going on, so the kids are probably excited. The adults are too. Um, but you'll be seeing the preacher next week back at our normal time. But for right now, you're kind of stuck with me. So, we're going to be coming out of Luke chapter 10, verses 25 and on. This is a story you're probably all familiar with. This is the Good Samaritan. And so it starts off at verse 25. And behold, a certain lawyer stood up and tempted him, saying, Master, what shall I do to inherit eternal life? And he said unto him, What is written in the law? How readest thou? And he answered, said, Thou shalt love the Lord thy God with all thy heart, with all thy soul, and with all thy strength, and with all thy mind, and thy neighbor as thyself. And he said unto him, Thou hast answered right, this do, and thou shalt live. But he, willing to justify himself, said unto Jesus, Who is my neighbor? So let's stop right there for a minute. So the thing he quoted is two verses. It is Deuteronomy 6:5 and Leviticus 19:18. Now, if you think about this and you take the Ten Commandments and you kind of squish them together, these two verses encapsulate all of them. The first few commandments it's all about loving God. The rest is all about how to love your neighbor. And so we move on to the parable part of it. And Jesus answered, said, A certain man went down from Jerusalem to Jericho and fell among thieves. And they stripped him of his raiment and wounded him and departed, and leaving him half dead. So, one thing to remember as we get into this parable is that Jesus was speaking to a predominantly Jewish audience from the 1st century A.D. We're primarily a non-Jewish audience from the 21st century. There's a lot of context in this that we won't necessarily understand. I'm going to do my best to kind of explain at least some of it. And the first one is concerning this road. So, like we will know, Atlanta or LA has terrible traffic. This road would probably been known to at least some of his audience. It was, let me look at my notes real quick. It was known as the way of blood, or the bloody pass. This was a kind of a bad road. And to give you an idea, in his I Have Seen the Promised Land speech, Martin Luther King describes the road this way, end quote. You see, the Jericho road is a dangerous road. I remember when Mrs. King and I first went to Jerusalem. We rented a car and drove from Jerusalem down to Jericho. And as soon as we got to that road, I said to my wife, I can see why Jesus used this as a setting for his parable. It is a winding, meandering road. It really is conducive for ambushing, unquote. And so here we see this road who is known for robberies, who's known for being a bloody road. And we see a man here who is beaten up, left for dead. And moving on to 31. And by chance there came down a certain priest that way. And when he saw him, he passed by on the other side. And likewise a Levite, when he was at the place, came and looked on him and passed on the other side. Now, the priest in modern day Baptist churches would be the preacher. And the Levite, while it isn't an apples to apples comparison, would be a deacon. So these guys walked up and they looked on him and they walked to the other side of the road and they went on by. And there's been a lot of people over the years who have speculated on why two men would do this. And it is certain laws in the Jewish faith with it, these men couldn't touch dead bodies, and other excuses were given. And personal opinion, the preacher talks about the book of Darrell. Well, right now we're in the pamphlet of Travis, I guess. for me, my opinion is if it was that, it would be because of fear. Hey, that's fine. I understand. That guy over there that just got beat up, the fellows that did that might still be around. And they might beat me up too. I might want to leave. As I was starting to write this up, there was a news story that came out about a landscaper down in Florida who saved a man's life. The man was having a seizure in his car, and the guy helped him out. And while this was going on, some of the witnesses heard the homeowner come out and tell the landscaper, let him die somewhere else. And we know that sounds horrible, but this is something that happens all the time. We see, not only in Bible times, not only in this parable, but we see all throughout life that this goes on. Let me get my notes. So, kind of the key to this here is, remember that love thy neighbor as thyself. And again, to quote Dr. King, he says that these two men may have asked this question. And, quote, if I stop to help this man, what will happen to me? But the Good Samaritan came by, and he reversed the question. If I do not stop to help this man, what will happen to him? End quote. Now, let's look at this, go on a little bit, and look at this third man. Verse 33. But a certain Samaritan, as he journeyed, came where he was, and he saw him. He had compassion on him. And he went to him and bound up his wounds, pouring in oil and wine, and set him upon his own beast, and brought him to the inn, and took care of him. And on the morrow, when he had departed, he took out 2 pence, and gave them to the host, and said unto him, take care of him, whatsoever thou spend, when I cometh again, I will repay thee. Which now these 3, thinkest thou, was neighbor unto him which fell among the thieves? And he said, he that showeth mercy unto him. Then Jesus said unto him, go and do thou likewise. Now, going back into that context, you have to understand that Jews and Samaritans hated each other. The reasons are probably a bit longer than we're going to go into today, but it would kind of be blacks and whites here in South Carolina 60, 70 years ago. They were not on good terms. And so we see these 2 men, the priest and the Levi, who should have loved this guy, should have been, showed him love, should have loved him as themselves. They pass on by. And this Samaritan, who the guy was beaten up, probably grew up hating. And he stops and he helps him. He shows him compassion. And kind of take notice, and a lot of other people said this, and again, how true this is and how much is just speculation, that in verse 37, and he, meaning the lawyer, said, he that showeth mercy unto him. And a lot of people speculate that the man couldn't even bring out that Samaritan was the neighbor, that it was, the one that showed mercy, that he couldn't bring himself to admit that it was someone else. So let's look at this and how we bring it out in our own lives. So it talks about loving their neighbor. What does it mean to love? Well, let's start with our story. He risks his life to help him. He uses his stuff to help. He performs first aid. He lets him ride on his own beast, horse, donkey, whatever it happens to be. He spent money on him and offered to spend more. And again, he did this for someone who probably hated him. Well, let's go into a little bit more detail. One of the most famous scriptures on love comes from 1 Corinthians 13. And it's kind of broken up into kind of 3 parts. And the first part, Paul goes in saying how he could do all these great things, but if he doesn't love, what's the point? starting in verse 1. Though I speak with the tongues of men and of angels, and have not charity, the King James charity and love mean the same thing. I have become a sounding brass and a thinking cymbal. And though I have the gift of prophecy and understand all mysteries and all knowledge, and though I have all faith that I could remove mountains and have not charity, I am nothing. And though I bestow all my goods to the poor, and though I give my body to be burned, and have not charity, it profits me nothing. Now, let's look at verse 3 just to the best example. And I bestow all my goods to the poor, and though I give my body to be burnt, and have not charity, it profits me nothing. So, how many people have we seen, and unfortunately maybe we've all done this at this point, have giving things to people in need, not out of love, but for the show? How many people, will do a little something for someone while people are watching, but as soon as they turn their back, it ends. And what's the old line from The Wizard of Oz? Pay no attention to the man behind the curtain. These people, and including sometimes us, unfortunately, we're like that. Watch the show. Pay no attention to the sad little man behind the curtain, but just watch what we show you. I'm sure those first two men could brag a lot. I'm sure they had done great things, and they could put on an awesome show. But without love, they walked on by. Moving on to verse 4. Charity suffereth long, and is kind. Charity envieth not. Charity valueth not itself. It is not puffed up. Doth not have itself not behave itself unseemly. Seeketh not her own. It is not easily provoked. Thinketh no evil. Rejoiceth not in iniquity, but rejoiceth in the truth. Beareth all things. Believeth all things. Hopeth all things, and endureth all things. Charity never faileth, but whatever there be prophecies, they shall fall. Whether there should be tongues, they shall cease. Whether there should be knowledge, it shall vanish away. But we know in part, for we know in part, and we prophesy in part. But that which is perfect is come. Then that which is part shall be done away. When I was a child, I speaketh as a child. I understood as a child. I thought as a child. And when I became a man, I put away childish things. For now we see through a glass darkly, but then face to face. Now I know in part, but then I shall know even as also as I am known. And now abideth faith, hope, and charity, these things, but the greatest of these is charity. So, if you can kind of squish all those first parts together, it's saying love is basically kind. It seems novel to some today, but how much further could we be if we were just nice to one another? Again, in our parable, who showed kindness? Who showed that love? It was, again, the Samaritan. And Paul ends the chapter by saying that the greatest of these is love. And between faith, hope, and love, the greatest is love. Faith and hope is great, but without love, what do we do? What do we do with it, with the faith and the hope? Love is the reason we tell others about our faith and our hope. Love is the reason we don't walk on by like we see in the first two people in the story. So 3. Who should we love? Short answer, everybody. We see in the parable that the Samaritan shows love to someone who probably hates him, and to someone he probably had been taught to hate right back. The Bible tells us in John 15:13 that there is no greater love than to lay down life for a friend. Now, I've been blessed to have some people in my life that, yeah, I'd take a bullet for them. Think myself lucky to do it. But on the other hand, have you ever met someone that, well, if they were on life support, you'd pull their plug to charge your phone? And all joking aside, I'm sure we all have someone in our life that's hard to love. Those first two guys, it should have been easy for them to help love the man on the side of the road. They should have wanted to help. The third one, it should have been easy for him to walk on by, to charge his phone. Who do we love? We love the people that it's easy to love. But more importantly, we love those who it's not easy to love. And trust me, I know that's hard. But that's what prayer is for. Let's look at Jesus' ability to bring people together. In Romans 1:13, we see a list of disciples who were there when Jesus ascended into heaven. Jesus had just went up into heaven, and in verse 13, and when they were come in, they went up into the upper room, which abode both Peter and James, and John, and Andrew, and Philip, and Thomas, and Bartholomew, and Matthew, and James the son of Alphaeus, and Simon Zelotes, and Judas the brother of James. Now, I want to look real quick for some more of that context. Typically, we look at the list of disciples, and we might learn it in children's church, but it's something we tend to pass on by real quick. But there's some great context in here. And so one of the ones whose name I read was Matthew. And we know from other parts of the Bible that Matthew was a tax collector, a publican. And remember, these would not have really been Jewish taxes. These would have been Roman taxes. First century AD, Israel was under occupation of Rome. These would not have been like your IRS agents. These would have been collaborators, traders. They would have been taking up money to give to the enemy, to give the people that were occupying you. And this type of job did not lend itself to saints, let's say. They probably also have been very, very corrupt. And so, we see Jesus' forgiveness of Matthew for that. But also we see Simon the Zealot. Now, in today's way of thinking, when we think of someone being a zealot, we think of someone that's passionate about something, maybe even obsessed with something. But in the first century, the Zealots were a terrorist group or freedom fighters, depending on your point of view. Typically, your point of view kind of depended on your view of the point. Was it the knife pointed at you or the guy you didn't like? So, before they had met Jesus, do you think these guys would have charged their phones? Do you think they would have gotten together? The next verse in Acts tells us that they were all in one accord, including these two guys. I mean, I can't say that if I wasn't Matthew, I wouldn't have been at least a little bit nervous when it was Simon's turn to carve up dinner. But through Jesus, they were all in one accord and working better for him. And so if God can bring those two people together, what can it help us do? So, bringing you to our third point. How do we love? How do we put all this into practice that the Bible says? Well, let's go back to our parable. A little bit modern terms. Which one of these is not like the others? See, I'm sure that first guy, he texted, right? Bless his heart, we need to pray for him. And I'm sure the second one put it up on his favorite social media. Bless his heart, we need to pray for him. I just told you prayer was important, and it is. But when people use it this way, in this context, they're using it as a way to walk on by. The third one, he did something. And something that didn't benefit him. So remember for the Samaritan, he got nothing out of helping this guy. Like, if he would have walked on by, the Jewish people probably would have, yeah, he's Samaritan, of course he's not going to help the guy. The Samaritans probably would agree, like, no, you don't help a Jewish guy. We hate each other, remember? First century AD, these guys did not get along. It did nothing to benefit him. But he was the one that actually stopped to do something. He didn't just talk about it. There's a line from an old country song. Thunder's just a noise, but lightning does the work. And it's easy to talk about a problem and go, oh, we wish this would be better. but to actually take the time to do stuff that doesn't always benefit us, well, that's a lesson that the church can learn. See, we build these great buildings, and nothing wrong with it. We have a great building here. We really love it. We would love if you would come and join us if you haven't before. We're 201 Green Village Road in Little River, if you're curious. But, shameless plug aside, we build these great buildings, and we stand at the door, and we go, we have a church here. Y'all come on in. And we kind of wait, and people don't come in. You go, well, we need something else. I know, we'll build a church sign, and we'll put funny sayings on it. That'll bring them in. And so we build a church sign. We put funny sayings on it. We turn to the rest of the choir, and we go, we got funny sayings. That'll bring them in. And that doesn't work. And because it's kind of a pet peeve of mine, we'll start a youth ministry or a children's ministry, and we'll get the kids in here for fun, and then the parents will come for the real stuff. Now, again, remember, these kids aren't clawhammers to build a church. They're at least as important part as the parents are. I've off my soapbox now. I'll get off my soapbox now. But the thing is, we stand at the door and we say, come in. And we expect people to come to us because it's easy. And again, when I say we, I mean me. I'm as guilty of being lazy with things as anybody. But all the programs, they're nice, and we all enjoy them. But you want to fill the church? You want to fill the seats? Invite your friends. Invite the people that are not your friends. Invite all the sinners you know. And that includes all of us, remember? We're all sinners. Go out and invite them. Tell them what God did for you, and tell them why they should come. I'm a huge sci-fi geek. And one of the Facebook groups I like is called Geeks Under Grace. And a while back, they posted this. Bear with me real quick. Pop culture often doesn't like us, the Christians. Christianity has hurt many people, and they've grown bitter because of it. Maybe they've been hurt personally, or they've seen others hurt from a distance. Either way, Christianity hasn't been the light in their lives that it should be. As to geeks in our faith, we're most connected with the people of pop culture. The gamers, the movie buffs, the otakus, and everyone else. Let us be a movement that shows them the light of Christianity is supposed to be. Let us provide them with love, kindness, hope, and grace that only can be found through Jesus. Love people so much they start to wonder the reason why. I love that last line, by the way. And unfortunately, that first part is kind of true. There is a stereotype about the church that this is where we go for an hour to go judge people. And unfortunately, we might have earned this. We probably have. I've seen it. I've experienced it. And I've done it. Not so proud of that last part. But it's easy to do, right? To judge others. It seems more and more there is a us versus them mentality. We sit in our echo chambers and we hear how right we are. And no one is willing to even listen to the other side. Now, I'm not saying we compromise our values, our morals, our honor. Romans 12:18 says, whenever possible, live as peacefully with all men. Whenever we can, to be peaceful. There are times when we can't. We can't compromise the gospel. We can't compromise our morals or honor. But for other things, the details. There's a Dr. Seuss book on where there's this arms race between these two groups of people, whether the toast should be butter side up or butter side down. And we're all part of these groups, right? Ford versus Chevy, 9 or 45, Android versus Apple, Coke versus Pepsi. The list goes on and on for infinity. The one thing we see with the Samaritan is he should have hated the man that was on the side of the road. Society told him to do it. That man probably hated him. But he was able to set aside those differences long enough to love him. The one thing to remember is our responsibilities as Christians is to let others see Christ in us. I forgot who I first heard say this, or I would give them credit, but I've repeated it a bunch and still do it because I really love this quote. We are the only Bible some people will ever read. Sometimes it's us. They're not going to crack open the Bible. They're not going to read that. They're just going to see Christ in us. And we have this responsibility. See, we've been given this great gift of salvation. And it was a gift given to us freely. We didn't pay the cost. But like I said, we have that responsibility to tell others that they may receive it also. So, in closing, why do we love? Because God first loves us. Who do we love? Short answer, everybody. How do we love? We share what God has done for us so that everyone might know him. So, that's it for me. Again, next week, the pastor will be by, so yay for that. I'm sure he'll do a much better job than I, but I thank you for the opportunity to be here. And again, we're having VBS. If you know any kids who in your life that you want to send out, or if you want to come yourself, we might teach you something, or we might put you to work, but we'll have a good time regardless. But again, good night.